Welcome to this Union Talk recap episode. It's Black History Month, and we at the AFT firmly believe that every child and every community is better served when their full story is woven into the fabric of American life. However, in states like Florida, Texas, and throughout the country, we have seen extremist policies that aim to restrict and often whitewash Black history in the name of protecting students from harsh concepts like racism and bigotry. The AFT, along with the NAACP and others, have been fighting against such censorship. Where extremists have banned books and censored curriculum, we champion teaching the tough parts of history. That's why we started our Reading Opens the World campaign, not only to engender the joy of reading, but ensuring that children of color see themselves reflected in history and literature. In today's recap episode, we revisit a conversation Randi had with Dr. Marcia Chatelain of Georgetown University and Professor Peter Levine of Tufts University to not only discuss the origins of the fight to teach honest history, but what we can all do to ensure no one's story is left out of the American tale. If you like what you hear in this episode, you can listen to the entire conversation by going to aft.org/Union Talk and search Teaching Honest History, which is the episode this conversation is from. So, without further ado, let's dive into this dialogue.
So I think that the conversation around the movement against critical race theory is the outgrowth of two things. The first one is, if you can imagine, and recall 2021. If we think about it in terms of an academic school year, we went from the George Floyd summer that inspired so many institutions to make a commitment to anti-racism. And by the end of the school year, we have this anti-CRT movement. How does it happen so quickly? Well, I think it comes from two places. One, the way that the right was able to leverage the critical thinking that came out of the George Floyd summer, whether it was about policing or about more respectful and inclusive education, and they knew how to weaponize them and infuse them into these astroturf movements where all of a sudden parents who may have never really been engaged in curricular issues, parents who never really thought twice about what their kids were being assigned at schools, are all of a sudden foot soldiers against critical race theory. And so I think that this is part of the dirty tricks that the right has always relied on, weaponizing learning, trying to suppress anything that looks like progress in our schools, and then deputizing parents, and I think particularly in a moment of white grievance, to do the dirty work of their campaigns. So there's that. But I think that there's something else that is also instructive about this moment, is the ways in which a lot of school communities made commitments to anti-racism without a really sound plan. And I think that the vulnerability of using the rhetoric of anti-racism as a way to kind of end difficult conversations about student experiences, or thinking, okay, this will be the salve to all of the noise, also, I think, put schools and school leaders in a really bad position, because I think people were making commitments to ideas and approaches that they didn't fully understand. And so now we have to find ourselves reinventing the wheel and going back to the progress that we made in public education in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and trying to have a more inclusive curriculum. And I think that this is an object lesson in the politics of backlash.
So I couldn't agree with you more, but I want to just ask Peter for his first, thoughts about it. I just want to say that, Marcia, I went back to my curriculum, to your point about the backlash. I'm a social studies teacher, Clara Barton High School. Frankly, I'm on leave right now to be the AFT president. And I went back to my own curricular work that I taught in the 1990s. And so much of what I taught in American history would be branded by Rufo in that kind of ideological way. And it is really pushing us backwards to to the opposite of what we need to do in terms of an inclusive curriculum that engages kids in each other's lived experience. And I couldn't agree with you more.
The thing that I am most heartbroken by is the fact that the 4 years where we had President Trump in office, we had a media landscape and an intellectual landscape that suggested that every idea was valuable, that if a person spews hateful garbage, you have to give them a listen. And I think that the confusion about respecting expression and not setting boundaries about expression that is really harmful to the larger culture, I think it's biting everyone in the backside and not setting those boundaries clear enough and having them, kind of, run rampant. And so I think we're in a process of undoing. I'm not hopeless that we can get our moral footing, but it's going to take a lot of work. And I think it's going to take a lot of taking responsibility for mistakes in the past.
Right. So that raises, again, I'm so grateful to talk to both of you, but that does actually raise some of the things in these new laws that are in some ways bizarre and a reflection of what you just said, Marcia. And I'm talking about the both sides isms, teach both sides of an issue and not actually be able to discern, fact from fiction. So if either of you were teaching high school social studies right now, what would you say or try to do about these laws that require the teaching of both sides? How would you handle that? Or would you just basically ignore it and wait for there to be, like in New Hampshire, a bounty that, thank God, the governor of New Hampshire, Republican, said that bounty, condemned that bounty that a very libertarian group called Moms for Liberty created. But what would you do if you were teaching high school right now and somebody told you to teach both sides of the Holocaust or both sides of slavery? How would you deal with it?
I mean, I think one thing is just to say I'm very sympathetic to my colleagues who teach K-12 schools because they have a lot harder job than I do and a lot harder job than they previously did under these conditions. So I don't know if I can really say what they should do. To make an obvious point, but you didn't actually quite explicitly say it, Randy. I mean, some things don't have two sides, and some things have more than two sides also. Right. So I think the two sides idea is also kind of polarizing. It assumes that there's a left and a right side to everything, whereas sometimes there are 14 different sides, and sometimes there's only one side. So that's what's wrong with it. Hopefully, most people will get that, and we'll get past this. I also assume that there'll be some First Amendment challenges to some of these laws. But in the meantime, I mean, the only thing I would say that's constructive, because mostly I'm just saying that it's hard, and I don't know the best strategy to avoid bad laws. But the one thing that I'd say that's constructive is there is a certain value to trying to find issues on which there are at least two good sides in order to learn that kind of skill. So, Randy, you might be mad at me, and we have known each other for a few years, but I actually use school choice in a undergraduate public policy course. I wouldn't have to do an education thing at all. It could be any public policy, but actually do school choice because I think there are a bunch of arguments around that coming from unexpected sort of strange bedfellows and, lots of different takes on it. And I choose it for that reason, so that there are sort of two sides, or there are more than two sides, but that you can start it as a binary, school choice or not. And I think that has some pedagogical value. So I guess one thing you might do if you're a teacher is you might actually try to navigate to issues where you think there are two sides. And that's a way into some of the great issues in American life, too, because we do have perennial questions about liberty versus solidarity or equality. We have these deep questions, the role of government. And so maybe that's the answer. I mean, in the laws are bad. They should be fought. If there's a way to subvert them, it's fine with me. But if they're on the books, maybe a part of the solution is actually to identify issues which do kind of have two sides and spend some time on them. So not slavery, but there might be issues around racial justice that have two sides.
Thanks for listening to this Union Talk recap episode. To listen to the full episode, head to aft.org/Union Talk.